Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. Ambitious, just together.
And with that, welcome at the German Climate Pavilion, here live from the COP28 in Dubai. Thanks for joining us. Sorry for the short delay, but it's great to see you here live in the pavilion, but also live in the live stream. Thank you so much for being here with us for the next hot hour when we debate from theory to action the climate crisis from a feminist foreign policy angle. The good news is, please feel also free to share your questions later on in our panel debate with us, as we do have a very hot topic to talk about. COP27 last year brought already the important decisions and steps when we look into the loss and damage fund forward. Now, it's just 24 hours ago at COP28. We had this historic start yesterday. When we look into all the work that worked into that fund 1.5 years ago. And last night, the first decision agreed at the conference led to the agreement on funding for the loss and damage fund. Now, when it comes to climate action, we shouldn't just only speak about climate, we should also speak about justice, and that's what we are here for now. A lot of voices from a civil society perspective last year mentioned that the gender negotiations were rather regarded as weak. And this is really the question, where is now COP28 headed? So the hopes and the stakes are very high for that COP. And we are here now with different voices from civil society, especially from the civil society, brought together by the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy based in Berlin, but also with the Federal Foreign Office. So why are we here for? We want to debate about the connection between feminist foreign policy and the climate crisis, with the question, what are feminist foreign policy countries currently championing in? Where are they failing? Where are the blind spots? Where are the gaps? These are the questions, just some questions that will keep us busy. But again, please feel kindly invited to also share your questions that are burning on your chest. My name is Katie Gallos, and I'm very excited to be your moderator for that evening. And with that, I hand over directly the floor to Jennifer Morgan, the State Secretary and Special Envoy for International Climate Action at the German Federal Foreign Office, for her keynote speech about climate, gender, and their role in international politics. And after that, we introduce you to the panel. Okay. Thank you. The floor is yours. Great.
Good evening, everyone. Great to be here with all of you to dig into this incredibly important topic that really, I think, is integrating step by step into certainly our foreign policy in Germany. And as we all know, we are in the middle of a massive climate crisis, and those impacts, they have far-reaching consequences that span across all borders, affecting every corner of our planet and every facet of human life. And we know all here that women, children, marginalized groups such as indigenous peoples are often amongst the most vulnerable, almost always, I would say, lacking the means and the power to protect themselves from the climate crisis and the threats it multiplies. And I think this is where the intersection really between feminist foreign policy and climate foreign policy to challenge climate change really becomes crucial. And I experienced it a bit directly. I had the honor of making a trip to the Pacific just a couple of weeks ago. I went to the Pacific Island Forum to meet there with leaders, but also on my way I visited Vanuatu. And there I spoke to a young mother who is now kind of with me, who said, climate change accompanies me everywhere I go. And she shared with me and other women with whom I met how they've set up local networks to warn their communities, warn their families when a cyclone is coming. Vanuatu has now had 3 cyclones. And also just, the crops that they have traditionally grown now, because of the intensity of the cyclones, the leaves, the kava leaves just, they get tipped over. So they have to, look at everything, which I think we know. And those types of organized women organizations who put a focus on communities-based adaptation, and they are really bravely fighting for the future of their families. And these are the marginalized groups that are most exposed to the climate effects. And I would say without their engagement, without us listening to them, there can be no solution for their communities. So I went to the Pacific to listen. I went to hear and bring back home the stories, the needs, the demands of these women and girls I met so that they can inspire our own work. And I think this is just one small piece of feminist climate foreign policy for me. We know that women bear a disproportionate effect and burden when it comes to adapting to and mitigating the effects of climate change. They're more responsible for caregiving, cooking, water collection, all of which are affected by many climate disruptions. And in many parts of the world, I think women's economic opportunities are closely tied to climate-sensitive sectors, such as agriculture. And also in climate-induced displacement, women and children may be also at a higher risk of violence, exploitation, and human trafficking. In fact, one woman I spoke to when I was traveling shared the fact that they are not able to provide regular, adequate meals to their families because of the climate impacts has brought more violence into their home because the men in the household take that out on them. And to me, that was the first person I had directly, I've read about this in the literature, but just to speak to a woman who was experiencing that directly was really quite, really sticks with me. So we need a feminist foreign policy that emphasizes inclusivity. We need that range of voices in the decision-making process. And I think this principle is equally relevant in the context of climate policy. Climate solutions, well, they have to involve the active participation of women, indigenous communities, persons with disabilities, LGBTQI+, and other marginalized groups whose perspectives are often absolutely critical in actually identifying innovative and locally appropriate solutions. So climate action only works with a whole of society approach. And this is also true, I may say, for successful climate negotiations. They need to be inclusive and listening to all voices, no matter which country they represent, no matter their age, their ethnic background. And I'm glad that we managed to have about 50% women in our German delegation. And I'm particularly glad that we, for the first time, as the minister recently said, took a little bit too long, I think, we have included youth delegates in our delegation. So the German government, we acknowledge that empowering women and marginalized communities, it's just not a moral imperative, but a strategic necessity in the battle against climate change. And one aspect of this empowerment is the commitment to addressing the gendered impact of climate change, both domestically and internationally. And so we seek to implement policies that take into account the differing vulnerabilities of self-identified women and self-identified men, especially in the context of adaptation and disaster risk reduction. And this means also providing access to resources, education, and opportunities that can help women become more resilient in the face of climate change related actions and challenges. So our International Climate Initiative does have a gender strategy, which put in place in 2021, which requires gender-responsive project planning as a minimum standard for ICI implementing organizations, which is another way of mainstreaming it into various organizations, and promotes the use of gender transformative approaches. We've now adopted a gender action plan to translate the strategy into concrete actions, and the plan lays out measures in different fields of action and provides the basis for systemically considering and promoting gender justice in all ICI projects. We are also launching the new Women and Climate Security Funding Initiative here at the COP with the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund to accelerate innovative financing for local women's organizations and communities at the forefront of preventing and responding to climate-related conflicts. This combines our engagement in peace building and climate action, aiming to increase women's leadership in conflict and crisis contexts. And we invite all of you to our launch event, actually on the 3rd of December at 10 a.m., also here in the German Pavilion, where women leaders from civil society organizations and academia will discuss these challenges, opportunities, and good practices, and where we will present this new initiative together with the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. We also, in our climate foreign policy, we actively are involving women, indigenous communities, and other marginalized groups, and we also really recognize how much we can learn from them. They often hold crucial knowledge and innovative solutions for mitigating the effects. And this also, in doing so, we hope that this can also sow some of the seeds for the power shift to a more equitable, inclusive climate action. So wherever I travel, for example, when the minister is traveling, so I meet activists, indigenous communities, people who are not in power. First, often, I try and do that first, and hope that that can give them a bit of visibility and also informs directly what we are doing. How can we ensure accountability? This was also a question that inclusivity standards are included in our climate foreign policy. There's different ways of doing this. I think we need to get even better about it. Ways that have recently occurred, there's a new strategy for the Green Climate Fund, where Germany is on the board, and we very much brought in the principles of our feminist foreign policy into the adaptation fund. And that we can really look and see how to have marginalized groups to have access to these instruments. And I think that is part of the GST agenda here. So finally, gender is a very important topic in climate negotiations, and rightly so. And at this COP, gender will be playing a role under the dedicated gender item, but also in many rooms. For us, it's critical to strengthen the climate-gender nexus overall. So that is through putting particular emphasis on strengthening the evidence base supporting gender mainstreaming and the implementation of NDCs in national adaptation plans and other national climate change policies, plans, strategies, and action. We also want to enhance implementation and coherence of gender decisions and mandates across the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement by having gender focal points within the UNFCCC. We've made a big step forward, but empowerment is key. And I also want to note that we also are following up from the last Bonn session, where there were many concerns that were raised with UN officials both in Bonn and in New York. We think that women who have been had to even go public in order to indicate what has happened to them, they should not have to relive those experiences. We should make sure we're doing that, so or addressing it. So thank you for attention. I'm really looking forward to listening and learning, and handing it back over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. I have good news for those standing. We have 5 more seats, but that's going to be in the first row. So for the brave ones, come along. You don't have to sit on the floor. I just see it here on the left, on the right. Please, feel free to come and join us here in the first row. We will not bite you. Wonderful. I'd like to introduce you to our panel. Now, first come, first serve. 3 to go, 2 to go. Countdown. With us today, to my right, in the center of the stage, is Aishka Najib. She is a 20-year-old activist working for climate justice in the United Arab Emirates. She collaborates with Fridays for Future from most affected people in areas, an organization that operates in areas most affected by climate change. She serves as the youth representative for UNICEF in the United Arab Emirates and also works with UN Women and Generation Equality as the head of the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Coalition. Please give her a round of applause. It's great to have you with us today. You brought your whole fan club with you. Wonderful. Okay. Next to her, also very famous, Sheena. Sheena Anderson, Program Manager at the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy based in Berlin. You're a feminist and intersectional environmentalist, political scientist from Germany. You're leading the CFFP's program on climate justice, anti-racism, and regularly you're writing on intersectional climate justice as an activist. Also, thank you for being here. And of course, we are joined by Nesma Mansour online. Thank you so much for making the time and for beaming yourself to Dubai here into the German Pavilion. You are a youth human rights defender and peace activist. You have more than 8 years of experience in human rights, including women and youth rights. You're a founding member of the Peace Track Initiative, and we want to hear all about it in a second. And you're currently the Media and Advocacy Officer. You're focusing on the intersectionality between peace building and climate justice. And you're with us today. It's great, and a great honor to have you on stage. And I hope you can hear you. The applause, that's just for you.
Thank you.
Oh, lovely, wonderful. Okay, we start into the panel debate, but please feel free to shoot your questions also along. Give me a hand sign. We have a big crowd, and it's important to be and to talk together about this topic. So, Sheena, I'd like to start with you. Of course, we are here at the COP28 in Dubai, and we just listened to Jennifer, who said, well, it's very important to, of course, connect feminist foreign policy with climate activism and climate policies, but is this the right space? Is this COP, or are COPs in general the right place to implement feminist policies towards climate action? Or would you say, oh no, they are better spaces, different spaces, and if so, where are they?
Is this working? Yeah, okay. Great question. Before I answer it, I just want to give a quick shout out to my MENA sisters, feminist sisters and siblings. We're wearing green today in solidarity with our feminist MENA sisters and siblings. And yeah, thank you for all the amazing work that you do here each and every day, outside and inside of COP. And by chance, this pavilion is also green. So, and to come back to your question, it's both, I would say. It's absolutely the right place because it is, whether we like it or not, still the most important conference on the climate crisis and tackling the climate crisis jointly on a global and international level. And it's a place where we try to achieve change, and wherever change happens, feminists are at the front. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important to acknowledge. So in that sense, I would say it is the right place. But I think most of us who have quite some COP experience know that it's unfortunately not the most inclusive, not the most intersectional, and not the most inviting space. It can actually sometimes be quite a toxic space. And I think everyone feels that, but specifically feminist activists. So I think Jennifer Morgan hinted already at some of the experiences. There's many, many more, and I think if we look around in spaces, who is there and who is not there, who made it, and it's yes, it may be tied to topics such as empowerment, but I often also say, like, I think a lot of people, or the amazing feminists that I get to work with, they already are empowered. Like, we don't need empowerment, we need money, we need visa, we need support, we need anti-discrimination laws and implementation also in spaces such as COP, and that makes it more inclusive, and we also need ways to make sure that our trans, non-binary, and two-spirit siblings can be in such spaces, which they currently can't. So I think that's important to acknowledge. And I think a lot of activists often think about, do I go to COP or not if I have the chance? It's always a question I think a lot of us ask themselves. But to make sure that if we decide to go, that we're also always holding space for those who cannot be here, and in that way try to make it as feminist as possible.
How do you do that? How does it look like a successful COP day for you from a feminist perspective?
Ooh,
put it into quote.
By governments committing billions of dollars to the loss and damage fund. But no, I think personally, to always, whenever I get a question or when I go to an event or when I speak somewhere, when I write something, to always keep in mind that, yes, I try to bring in my perspectives and the groups that I kind of represent, but also to think about who's not here and do I know someone that I can quickly reach out to? Have I ever spoken to someone? Can I bring in that perspective and hold that space, not only in my heart, but actually in what I'm demanding, and be loud for people who can't be here. And I think that's important, and that's something everyone can do, whether you're an activist or you're a government delegate or a researcher. And I think that's the very first step.
So there is no excuse to not hold space.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sheena. Nesma, I'd like to come in with you here on our panel. And when we talk about the connection between or within the climate discourse and the feminist foreign policy, so maybe you can give us a glimpse from your perspective when you look into the feminist foreign policies countries currently called out as championing the climate discourse when it comes to climate action. What are these countries currently championing? In what regard would you say, okay, this makes it really successful?
Thanks a lot for having me today. I'm very happy to be with you, and even virtually. Hopefully that in the next few days I will be with you like physically. So I think that feminist countries should be championing for more human rights-based feminist climate agenda, and this should be done in a participatory manner that is inclusive and that really needs to go and look into the affected community. So, for example, I was very happy to hear that Her Excellency, who have visited the Pacific Island, have really heard from the affected communities and really was there in the front line, because understanding climate and how it affects people, it's very hard to do it in non-participatory manner, in an assumption that we know what is happening. No, we don't know. People should go on the ground, and people should understand as well that climate change is not a national issue. What is being emitted today in Europe is affecting and devastating those who are not in Europe, who are in areas that are very vulnerable and areas that do not have the infrastructure needed to address this issue. So I'm very happy to hear that Germany is already leading on the area of participatory, but we need to emphasize that for.
But what again? Sorry to jump in here. What do you mean by emphasize it? Do we need more listening? Because Jennifer Morgan was just mentioning.
Indeed.
Okay. Do we need more? Tell us a little bit more. The to-do list. It can be long. So, the post-its are already taken out.
In order to call an agenda, a feminist agenda for climate change, it needs to have to have a continuous dialogue, to have a co-creation. So we are not creating a feminist climate agenda while we are in our offices, way far away from the ground. So this continuous dialogue have also to empower people who are in the ground. There has to be a decolonial aspect as well, and we do not come with our perceptions that we understand what is best for them. We need to listen. We need always to be open and to hear what do these people need.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Jennifer, I'd like to come back to you. Having this moment of self-reflection quickly when you're listening to that voice or to the young voices that we've heard so far, where do you see your to-dos or something that you can take as homework where Germany still has a little bit of work to do, still on the way forward, but as a self-reflective moment, maybe you can share some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear we have work to do. So I think we're learning as we go. I think, the continuous dialogue and the co-creation piece, I think, is incredibly important. And I think we try to do that, for example, in the creation of the Loss and Damage Fund. The most important people in the room were the LDCs and the SIDS. But I think where we can do more is, and sometimes I think this works and sometimes it doesn't, is bringing in the community-based and also not only particularly vulnerable countries, but particularly vulnerable peoples, and I think that is some of the work that's done through ICI, but I think breaking down some of the barriers to that in some of the international financial institutions is a continued piece of work that I think we need to keep out. The decolonial aspect as well, understanding that in how we do partnerships with developing countries now. I think there is, and here I often ask for ideas on this because we are now in a situation where countries that beforehand didn't necessarily see themselves as energy powerhouses in the world, all of a sudden could be. That they first need to meet their energy access goals, and then some of them, are interested in exporting, for example. But what does that look like? How do we do that in a non-extractive way? How do we do it with local value creation? How do we do it with local communities? And that's it's a very big stated goal, but now we are trying to implement it, and there I think we need help.
Wonderful, and of course questions from the different communities. Aishka, I'd like to come back to you. Thank you so much for being on that panel and for showing what you're doing as well to us, because it takes, of course, a lot of courage also to be vulnerable in that regard and to share the vulnerabilities as an activist. You represent in so many different ways different groups: the youth, the young women, the UAE, the Fridays for Future, most affected people in areas. So you need to combine so many different perspectives. How do you do it? Share with us your thoughts also on the COP now taking place here at the UAE, your home. How do you manage to bring everything together in your mind and in your heart?
I think I will start by my roles before I get to COP, because whether COP exists or not, we would all continue to do this work either ways. So I want all of us to take a step back and go to the basics and reflect on the fact that when we talk about climate crisis, it did not come up in a world that was fair, in a world that was equitable and just. It came up in a world that is driven by oppressive systems and structures. That's where climate crisis was born, in a very unequal world. And what that means is those whose lives are, revolving around these unequal systems of oppression, injustice, will continue to face the worst impacts of the climate crisis. And that's why, often at times, when I sit in COP venues, when I sit in panels, I hear a lot of solutions, which is amazing and helps me keep going and helps me be more hopeful. However, a lot of these are response measures. How much ever response measures we have, we also need transformative measures, which means as long as systemic oppression continues to exist, the climate crisis will always exist. And I think that's where feminist foreign policy comes in. Because when we look at feminist structures, principles, and values, they urge us, they challenge us to sit with the discomfort of all of our structural imbalances and see where we can transform power. So that's what I go back to with my different hats on, working with young women or working with, my intersecting diversities, working with children. And also, coming again, I'm sorry. Sometimes I think there's a big gap when we talk about young women, children, and then, they're always painted as like people who can give pretty statements or like light up a room, and they're always talked about in the future tense, like future policy makers and so on. But we're here, we're already present, we already have transformative solutions. And I think that's what's missing, right? Whenever we have these conversations, including about feminist foreign policy, including about how we can have transformative justice practices, we are hardly ever included in the implementation phase. We are hardly ever included as co-owners of the processes, as co-creators of the processes. And even when we are included, it's most of the time, as Jennifer was commenting, in extractive capacities. We're not valid for our time. We're not paid, compensated for our knowledge that we put forward. So with my different hats on and also being here
With the COP now taking
with the
place.
COP taking place, actually come here and challenge these systems and these practices.
What's the most challenging thing that you're facing right now in the field as an activist? Can you share with us something?
What are we not facing? All we face are challenges, one way or the other. But I do want to share that just before coming here to this event, I was at the Women and Gender Pavilion with my...
You were not the only one, I guess. You got some applause here.
Yes, with my MENA sisters as we launched the MENA Feminist Task Force, with COP being held in the MENA region. And there was a very big reason why we did that, because the issues and the challenges, the lived realities that we have been experiencing in the MENA region have been historically excluded for a very long time. Because it's not a very pretty thing to talk about. Nobody likes to talk about, our stories. And when I was in that panel, my sister from the MENA Feminist Task Force mentioned something very critical. And that was, if we fund militarization, we will continue to have refugees. If we fund the climate crisis, we will continue to have climate refugees. So you cannot be sitting here complaining and talking, or even talking about various actions, programs that we can give to refugees. We can create with refugees, when simultaneously we're continuing to fund the climate crisis and continuing to fund the militarization. It will be an endless, vicious loop that we will be stuck in. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we are not addressing. We are not being honest with ourselves as we talk about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Sheena, I'd like to come back to you. Talking about feminist foreign policy, Germany has feminist foreign policy included by the Federal Foreign Office, but also by the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, but now we are sitting here. So from your perspective, how does it work already now in Germany, the combination and the connection between the feminist foreign policy and the German climate policies? How do you look at them?
I'll start with the positive first. I learned in school you always have to start with the positive first. I think, and I spoke about this in other events a couple of times, but I think what civil society, and specifically feminist civil society, and a lot of climate activists and champions in and outside of Germany really welcomed was the move of climate foreign policy into the Foreign Office and the dedication to with like Jennifer Morgan's position, but also other staff to this topic, and really bringing this more and more to the international level and making it clear that it is a priority of Germany's climate foreign policy. I think what we're missing is the strong link with feminist foreign policy. So I think often it's unclear, is it two different things, or is it one feminist foreign policy that also focuses on climate? And for, I think, civil society, and specifically feminist civil society, that makes it hard to really connect with the respective policymakers working on that, because you're kind of like pushed around, oh, that person is responsible for this and that person responsible for this, whereas for us, or for me and my organization working on feminist foreign policy, it is very clear that the climate crisis and climate security for mostly marginalized communities and most affected people and areas, that is always a priority of any feminist foreign policy. I think it's great that climate diplomacy is specifically mentioned in the document and in the guidelines on feminist foreign policy, but it could be stronger, and there has to be more collaboration with civil society, but also among other FFP countries, because FFP is not about women's empowerment. It's not about having a female or a woman as a minister. It is really about, we heard the word before, transformational change, about system change, about really making this a livable planet, which it will not be.
Yeah.
It already isn't for a lot of people.
But when we look into the publications of the CFFP, you say feminist foreign policies are on the rise. Some call it a trend. So we could say we are on the right path, or are we still lacking the speed that we need?
I think it is a trend, or it did become a trend in a good and in a bad way. There's, did Nesma want to come in?
Yeah, sure. But finish your sentence and then.
I think it's good that more and more countries adopt a feminist foreign policy. And there's collaboration between the FFP countries, and that's great. But we need stronger ambition. We need more documents. So Germany has a very extensive document. That's not the case for every FFP country. Climate is not a priority everywhere, and FFP still lacks an intersectional approach in most countries. So we talk only about women. We don't integrate other marginalized communities. We talk a lot about empowerment. We don't talk about money or justice. We talk about inclusion, but not about power shifting and giving up power, because empowerment always comes with giving up power, because we can't all be empowered. We can't all have power. Someone has to give up power so that others can be empowered. And these people are, I think, people know who they are, but and that needs to happen, and that needs to be one of the primary goals of any feminist foreign policy.
Thank you, Sheena. I'd like to come back to you, Nesma, and then I open up the floor, of course, to your questions. Just give me a hand sign when I look to you to give an overview how many questions we have. So, Nesma, of course, I introduced you as a founding member of the Peace Track Initiative. Please tell us more. We want to hear all about it, because it was established, and now, of course, the work has changed, specifically in these times when we debate about climate justice. So just give us a glimpse. What keeps you busy, and what is the important thing to remember that you're working on?
Yeah, thank you for giving me a space to talk about the work of Peace Track. Peace Track Initiative is a women-led organization. It was formed by us women, Yemeni women, in the diaspora and in Yemen, in response of the exclusion of Yemeni women in the ongoing crisis. So the war that broke out have led us to have a very limited space for women. Because of this, we have been championing for a more gender peace process, a more for feminist peace process that is inclusive, that is responsive to the needs of the people on the ground. So since 2015, my colleagues and I, we were very busy focusing a lot on the Yemeni peace process, focusing about how conflict is affecting women, how the intersectionality of so many things are affecting women, but also other groups. Because when I talk about women, I'm thinking about also rural women, uneducated women, women who are from marginalized group in the country. So Peace Track was formed on these spaces, and we actually have been working on our own feminist peace roadmap. The feminist peace roadmap has been our key blueprint that we have been advocating for, to have an inclusive peace process. So, and through our work, I would say that the progress will lead us to a place where we now are looking directly to conflict, gender, and climate, because Yemen is one of the most fragile countries in the world in terms of climate adaptation. So, for example, at the beginning of last month, there was a cyclone that hit the eastern part of Yemen that is neighboring Oman. And if we compare how the cyclone have affected Oman and have affected Yemen, it's completely different. And in Oman, they evacuated population. They had sanctuaries to keep people safe. And in Yemen, hundreds of thousands of people were displaced. They lost their means of income. And I am 100% sure, because of the intersectionality of the identities of women and the marginalized group on the ground, these people were ignored. So right now we are calling for a gendered adaptation plan from the Yemeni government, because unfortunately being busy with the conflict, which is another thing that I'm happy that Aishka have mentioned, is the question of militarization. Militarization is a huge factor that is driving the conflict crisis. And in the conflict-affected countries, this just adds another layer of complication. And it is sad when we talk about accountability. It's not that it's horrific. Sorry, I will not say it. It's horrific to know that militaries are not obliged by the Paris Agreement to report on their emissions. So today we are in a world where we do not know, in fact, in real number, how much these emissions are affecting. The estimations have been saying that if we combine all the militaries of the world, we will have them as the fourth largest emitter of
Emitter of the?
I forgot the name of the gases.
Okay, thank you. No, thank you so much. I'll have a look around and then I come back to you for a question if there's no questions from the audience, but I'm sure you have questions. Oh, wonderful. I have a microphone. Please be precise. Tell us who you are and what's your concrete question. It's great to have you, and then we hand over the microphone to you.
Thank you very much. My name is Michelle Bensing. I'm working as an environment consultant with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Thank you actually so much for addressing the topic of militarization. As many feminists think and know that demilitarization is a key issue of a feminist foreign policy. And we do know that the military emissions are around 5.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and that the countries most contributing to the climate crisis are actually spending 30 times more on their military than they do on climate finance. So we have the MENA Feminist Demand document, and actually you're mentioning demilitarization for climate and gender justice. So maybe you can elaborate on these demands, Aishka and Nesma, one more time, but also perhaps Jennifer Morgan could react to this. Isn't it part of a feminist foreign climate policy to actually also talk about demilitarization, reallocation of military spending, and transparency and accountability for military emissions? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll start with that question. Please, thank you. Thank you for being here, and I'll come back to you in a second. Let's start with that short question. So can you give us a glimpse, Aishka, what you can share with us, and then, of course, Jennifer, I'll come to you.
Yeah, for sure. I think Michelle kind of summed it up really well. But as part of the MENA Feminist Task Force, obviously the MENA region have been conflict inflicted for a really long period of time, historically as well. We wanted to highlight the issue of demilitarization in terms of climate action as a valid format of climate action in our key demands document. And we do talk about redirecting military spending towards adaptation funding gaps, loss and damage funding gaps, and mitigation funding gaps. Yesterday, the UNEP's adaptation gap report came out, and it said that right now we need 18 times more funding to meet the adaptation needs. 18 times more funding than we have right now. But guess where all those funds are being directed towards? Militarization. That is, in fact, fueling the climate crisis, which is, in fact, widening this gap. So how will this gap ever cease to, eradicate? How do we eradicate this gap? So these are the kind of things that we touch upon in our demands document as part of the MENA Feminist Task Force.
Maybe Jennifer Morgan has an answer to that. How do we write it? Big question, I know.
No, I can share a few thoughts on all of this. I mean, it's obviously the link between military and emissions and climate and conflict. And I mean, it's first of all, it's one that I think is getting better understood thanks to work like of your organizations. I think there's a tendency to operate in silos and not to be linking things up, and obviously we can't do that because we have to think of everything at the same time. So on the military emissions piece itself, I mean, Germany is, has been working with NATO to actually, and I know also the securitization of climate is also an issue, but we also need to be having these security organizations taking climate change, climate crisis as a serious security issue, whether it be through looking at and addressing their own emissions, which is one thing that we've been doing and our Ministry of Defense is doing, need to do more there, whether it is integrating climate knowledge into peacekeeping missions. This is something that Germany is doing, particularly supporting the United Nations in doing that, because, well, for all the reasons that one knows, but again, trying to bring these different worlds together where people don't necessarily look at, the models that now are able to say, this is where there's likely to be some kind of extreme droughts coming up, highly sensitive areas, potential for more terrorism, for more conflict. So this is how we bring a facilitative mediator role into that. Recently worked on that in Nigeria. So there's that part of it as well. And the last thing I guess I would mention, which I try and bring into these conversations, is the security risk of continuing to use fossil fuels. So because we know that with the further exploration of fossil fuels comes more, obviously, temperature increase and more conflict as with it. And therefore, it is in the interests of security organizations and not only organizations, but governments to be looking at how can we be doing more to not be using more fossil fuels. In fact, and that links us to our agenda here at the COP, to phase out fossil fuels in a just and equitable way, because, and I think working with that community to get that mind switch, also to see renewable energy, implemented well as actually peace builders.
Thank you. All right, I have one more question. This is just a note for you for the statement in a second. Please be precise in your question and tell us who you are.
Hello, my name is Simon Pfluger. I'm a climate policy advisor and advisor to the CEO at the sustainable finance think tank Climate & Company. So recently we had a discussion in the company how I, as a man, can actually credibly become more involved in feminism, feminist foreign climate policy, etc. And then we came up with this coaching program it's called Male Allyship. And its idea is that men become more gender sensitive and inclusive leaders. Ms. Najib, you were mentioning it. The climate crisis has been caused by systemic oppression. I want to add by men, if I may. So we are the problem. And unfortunately, I do not see too many of my gender here today in the audience. Now my question to the panel. How do you think male allyship to become more gender sensitive and inclusive leaders can be incorporated in climate foreign policy? And do you think this would be possible, for example, here at COP?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Keep the microphone. We dive right in. Sheena, let's start with you. How can we create more man allyship? And, is it needed? What do you think of that?
Great that you're doing that. I think often when questions as such, and they're important, but when they come up, they always think in terms of like, how can I keep my position? But, I come back to the word empowerment, empower others. And I think what a lot of mostly men, mostly white men, if I add here, have to understand that it will not work without giving something up. So how to really think and strategize around that, because we cannot all be leaders and all be in powerful positions. I mentioned that earlier. Another thing is money. Give us money. Feminist organizations do not have money. Climate activists do not have money. White men have money. So give us money. That's one thing. Another is also realizing, and that goes for everyone, not only for men, realizing when it's your time to speak and when it's your time to, sorry, I'll just put it that way, shut up. Like, you know, just learning when do we have to take a step back and when is it our time to shine or when is it our time to just support others and uplift others. I think that's very important. And also talk to other men and call them out on their actions, be loud, tell them to shut up, tell them to step down, tell them to give money, all of that, and really strategize around that. And I can tell you, I speak at a lot of feminist foreign policy events. The audience usually looks like that. It's even less men, actually. So it's not that surprising.
Thank you for that question. And I think there is room for a conversation after the event. I sense that you still have an after question, but I have like the clock's ticking and we have an event afterwards. So I'm very sorry to make the dot here. But nevertheless, I mean, Sheena, you will not run away from stage, so please stay with us. It's great to have you with us. Please give the audience, please give the panel a big round of applause. Thanks to Jennifer Morgan, Aishka Najib, Gina Anderson, and Nesma Manzoor. Nevertheless, it's not me to wrap it up. It is the vision statement that will wrap up our evening by Aishka Najib. So the stage is all yours. To the lectern, deep breathe in, and or you can stay seated here.
Yeah, I thought I would just...
Let's stay comfortable. Okay. What is the message that we should take home this evening?
I did just decide to write it down, so I'm actually able to say.
Use the microphone.
Yeah. So I think one thing that we have collectively agreed today is that there is an urgent need to develop and deploy new decolonized, feminist, social contracts, right, that is free from discrimination to positively contribute to the climate, environment, conflict resolution, labor rights, gender justice principles, just transition principles, prioritizing marginalized communities, and ensuring meaningful and equitable participation in decision making of women, young women, girls, youth in all our diversity.
Thank you, Aishka. Thank you so much. It's lovely to have you. We have a Sunday event at 10 a.m. for the launch event. Please feel very much invited, and I'll see you soon. Thanks for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. Ambitious, just together.